The galaxy had rules. Ancient, unbroken rules. For over 60,000 years, every intelligent species that reached the stars followed the same path. Exploration, expansion, then submission to the greater powers that already ruled the void. No one challenged the balance. No one survived if they did. The Galactic Concord, the ruling body of 12 dominant empires, had seen it all. Rising civilizations, rebellions, extinction events. Entire star systems erased without hesitation. Fear kept the galaxy in order. Until the signal came. It was first detected at the edge of known space. A dead zone. A region so quiet that even light seemed reluctant to travel through it. No trade routes. No colonies. No strategic value. Only silence. That's why the listening post almost ignored it. Repeat the scan, Technician Vora said, her voice sharp with irritation. I already did, replied the junior analyst, his limbs twitching nervously. It's still there. Vora leaned closer to the display. A signal. Not random. Not natural. Structured. Deliberate. And impossibly powerful. Origin? She asked. The analyst hesitated. Then swallowed. Unknown. That was the first problem. The second came seconds later. It's not just a signal, he added quietly. It's a warning. Across the galaxy, signals were common. Distress calls. Trade beacons. Diplomatic transmissions. This was none of those. It wasn't asking for help. It wasn't announcing presence. It wasn't even communicating. It was declaring something. A statement, encoded in every wavelength. We are here. Within hours, the message reached the Concord. Within days, fleets were mobilized. Within weeks, fear began to spread. Because the signal didn't stop. It grew stronger. Closer. Grand Marshal Threx stood in the observation chamber of the Concord's central station, staring into the endless dark. Explain it to me again, he said. Behind him, a cluster of advisors shifted uneasily. It's moving, one finally said. That's impossible. Yes, sir. The signal source is advancing. Constant velocity. Direct vector toward the inner systems. Threx turned slowly. No known vessel can project a signal across that distance. We are aware, sir. Then it is not a vessel. Silence filled the chamber. No, the advisor said carefully. It is. 3 exploration fleets were dispatched. None returned. No wreckage. No distress calls. Just gone. That's when the galaxy began to understand. This wasn't first contact. This wasn't diplomacy. This wasn't even war. This was something else. Far beyond the outer colonies, beyond the mapped stars, beyond even the forgotten graveyards of ancient civilizations. Something moved. Not fast. Not stealthy. Not hidden. It didn't need to be. It carved its path through space like a blade through water, bending gravity, distorting time, leaving behind ripples that instruments could barely comprehend. And at its center, a ship. No, not a ship. A fortress. A moving continent of metal and fire. Its surface was layered with armor kilometers thick, etched with patterns that looked less like engineering and more like scars. Weapons lined its hull, not in rows, but in clusters, as if designed for annihilation rather than combat. Its engines didn't glow. They burned, like captured stars chained to its will. And at the heart of it all, a single insignia. A symbol no one in the galaxy recognized. A blue sphere. Cracked. Surrounded by fire. Inside the vessel, alarms did not blare. There was no panic. No urgency. Only calm. Controlled. Deliberate. Status report. A voice echoed through the command deck. Deep. Measured. Human. Outer perimeter clear, replied an officer. No resistance detected. Of course not, another said quietly. They're watching. A pause. Then, let them. Commander Elias Vance stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, how many signals have they sent? 17 attempts at communication. Response. None given. Vance nodded. Good. The crew didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They understood. This wasn't a mission of exploration. This wasn't first contact. This was a message. And messages like this didn't require conversation. They required impact. Back in the Concord, panic was no longer contained. It just crossed the outer boundary. How? That's impossible. Energy readings are off the charts. Fleet Command is requesting authorization to engage. Grand Marshal Threx raised a hand. Silence fell instantly. Show me. The main display activated. For the first time, the galaxy saw it. No one spoke. No one moved. Because what they were looking at was not something that belonged in their universe. It dwarfed everything. Even from astronomical distance, its presence dominated the screen. Sensors struggled to define its edges. It seemed to blur reality itself. "What is that?" someone whispered. No one answered. Because deep down, they already knew. It wasn't just a battleship. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something far worse. Something the galaxy had never faced before. A species that did not fear them. Commander Vance watched as the first Concord fleet assembled in the distance. Hundreds of ships. Thousands of weapons. A show of force meant to intimidate. To dominate. To control. He almost smiled. "Permission to proceed?" asked his tactical officer. Vance took a slow breath, then spoke the words that would echo across the galaxy. "Granted." The battleship moved. Just slightly. Just enough. And the galaxy, for the first time in 60,000 years, felt something it had long forgotten. Fear. The fleet of the Galactic Concord had never known defeat. Not once. For 60,000 years, their combined might had crushed rebellions, erased civilizations, and rewritten the laws of entire star systems. They did not lose. They did not retreat. And they certainly did not fear a single ship. Final formation achieved, Fleet Admiral Korvax announced. His flagship, Dominion Spear, sat at the center of a massive armada. Over 300 warships arranged in perfect tactical alignment. Dreadnoughts in the front. Carrier vessels behind. Support frigates flanking both sides. A wall of power. A statement. Target remains stationary, an officer reported. Korvax narrowed his eyes. Still no response. "None, Admiral. It has ignored all communication attempts." "Arrogant," Korvax muttered. Then louder. "Charge primary weapons." Across the fleet, energy began to build. Plasma cores ignited. Graviton cannons aligned. Missile bays opened like the jaws of predators. This was not a test. This was an execution. "Last chance," the communications officer said. "Shall we issue a final warning?" Korvax didn't hesitate. "No." On the Concord command station, Grand Marshal Threx watched in silence. "Begin engagement," he ordered. The galaxy held its breath. Then, fire. A storm of destruction erupted from the Concord fleet. Beams of concentrated plasma tore through space. Missiles streaked forward in synchronized waves. Gravity distortions twisted the battlefield itself, designed to crush anything caught within. It was overwhelming. Absolute. Unavoidable. And it all struck the human battleship. For a moment, there was light. Blinding. Consuming. A detonation so vast it lit up the surrounding void like a newborn star. Direct hit, an officer confirmed. Multiple impacts. No chance of survival. Korvax allowed himself a thin smile. Scan for debris. The sensors activated. Searching. Analyzing. Confirming the kill. Then, silence. "Report," Korvax said. The sensor officer didn't respond. "Report." "I'm trying, Admiral." "What is the issue?" The officer's voice shook. "There's nothing." Korvax frowned. "Nothing. No debris. No energy collapse. No fragmentation." "That's impossible." "I know, sir." Before anyone could speak again, a new signal appeared. Not from the fleet. From inside the explosion. "Energy spike detected," another officer shouted. The light faded. And it was still there. The human battleship hadn't moved. Hadn't broken. Hadn't even been scratched. The weapons fire, capable of destroying planets, had done nothing. "Shields?" Korvax demanded. "No detectable shield signature." "Then how is it intact?" No one had an answer. On the human vessel, Commander Vance stood calmly. "Impact assessment." "Negligible," replied the tactical officer. "Hull integrity at 100%. Vance nodded slightly. "Good. Their turn is over." He looked at the fleet ahead. Hundreds of ships. Thousands of lives. A civilization's pride. "Let's begin." On the Concord flagship. "Admiral," the sensor officer whispered. "It's powering up." But it wasn't like anything they had seen before. No charging glow. No energy buildup. No warning. Just a shift. Space itself seemed to bend around the human ship. Not violently. Not chaotically. But precisely. Like reality was being rewritten. Targeting systems are offline. Navigation is failing. "I can't. Something's interfering with the..." Then the first ship vanished. No explosion. No debris. No signal. One moment it existed. The next, It didn't. What just happened? Korvax shouted. Unknown. It's just gone. Then another ship disappeared. And another. And another. Panic spread through the fleet. Break formation. Evasive maneuvers. Return fire. Weapons fired again. Desperation replaced discipline. But it didn't matter. Then, silence. Report, Korvax said. The sensor officer didn't respond. Report. I'm trying, Admiral. What is the issue? The officer's voice shook. There's nothing. Korvax frowned. Nothing. No debris. No energy collapse. No fragmentation. That's impossible. I know, sir. Before anyone could speak again, a new signal appeared. Not from the fleet. From inside the explosion. Energy spike detected, another officer shouted. The light faded. And it was still there. The human battleship hadn't moved. Hadn't broken. Hadn't even been scratched. The weapons fire, capable of destroying planets, had done nothing. Shields? Korvax demanded. No detectable shield signature. Then how is it intact? No one had an answer. On the human vessel, Commander Vance stood calmly. Impact assessment. Negligible, replied the tactical officer. Hull integrity at 100%. Vance nodded slightly. Good. Their turn is over. He looked at the fleet ahead. Hundreds of ships. Thousands of lives. A civilization's pride. Let's begin. On the Concord flagship. Admiral, the sensor officer whispered. It's powering up. But it wasn't like anything they had seen before. No charging glow. No energy buildup. No warning. Just a shift. Space itself seemed to bend around the human ship. Not violently. Not chaotically. But precisely. Like reality was being rewritten. Targeting systems are offline. Navigation is failing. I can't. Something's interfering with the... Then the first ship vanished. No explosion. No debris. No signal. One moment it existed. The next, it didn't. What just happened? Korvax shouted. Unknown. It's just gone. Then another ship disappeared. And another. And another. Panic spread through the fleet. Break formation. Evasive maneuvers. Return fire. Weapons fired again. Desperation replaced discipline. But it didn't matter. The survivors didn't stop running. They jumped system after system without coordination, without formation, without dignity. Warships that once represented the absolute authority of the Galactic Concord now fled like frightened animals. And everywhere they went, they carried the same message. They erased us. Not defeated. Not destroyed. Erased. Across the core systems, panic spread faster than any signal. Civilizations that had once feared the Concord now feared something else entirely. Because if the Concord could fall, then nothing was safe. Emergency sessions were called. Entire governments froze. Trade routes collapsed. Border defenses activated. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the balance was broken. Inside the grand deliberation chamber, chaos reigned. They must be stopped. With what? You saw what happened. That thing is not a ship. It's a weapon of extinction. Then we negotiate. That word lingered in the air. Negotiate. Grand Marshal Frex stood at the center of it all, his expression carved from stone. For 60,000 years, he said slowly, we have dictated the terms of every encounter in this galaxy. Silence began to fall. We have never asked. He looked around the chamber. At the rulers of empires. At beings who had commanded the destruction of entire species without hesitation. Now we will. No one argued. Because for the first time, they understood their place. A transmission was prepared. Not a demand. Not a warning. A request. This is the Galactic Concord. The message began, broadcast across every known channel. We acknowledge your power. A pause. We request communication. The signal was sent. Then again. And again. 17 times. On the 18th attempt, something changed. On board the human battleship, a tone echoed softly across the command deck. Incoming transmission, the communications officer said. For the first time since entering the galaxy. Commander Elias Vance turned. Source. The Concord. A brief silence followed. Then, put it through. The main display flickered. For a moment, nothing appeared. Then, a figure. Tall. Alien. Unfamiliar. Grand Marshal Frex stood before them. But something was different. The authority was still there. The presence. The weight. But the arrogance was gone. This is Grand Marshal Frex of the Galactic Concord, he said. His voice was steady. but only just. We request dialogue. On the human ship, no one spoke. Not immediately. Not urgently. Because this moment had been expected. Commander Vance stepped forward. For the first time, humanity spoke. This is Commander Elias Vance of the United Earth Directorate. The chamber on the Concord side went still. Not just at the words, but at the tone. Calm. Measured. Unafraid. You engaged us without understanding, Vance continued. No, Threx replied. We followed protocol. A pause. Exactly, Vance said. The word landed heavier than any weapon. Threx straightened. Then help us understand. Another silence. Longer this time. On the human ship, several officers exchanged glances. This was the moment. Vance finally spoke. You've been watching the stars for 60,000 years, he said. You've seen civilizations rise and fall. You believe you've seen everything. His eyes hardened. You haven't seen us. On the Concord side, no one moved. Where did you come from? Threx asked. Vance didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured. The screen shifted. What appeared next was not a fleet. Not a weapon. Not even a star system. It was a graveyard. Dozens of shattered worlds. Broken moons. Stars dimmed to dying embers. Entire systems. Destroyed. What is this? One of the Concord advisors whispered. Vance's voice was quiet. Our history. Silence. We were not always alone, he continued. There were others. Stronger than you. Older than your Concord. A pause. They found us. Threx felt something cold settle in his chest. What happened to them, he asked. Vance looked directly at him. We survived. The meaning hit like a shockwave. You're saying, one of the advisors began, his voice shaking. You fought them. Vance didn't smile. Didn't boast. Didn't hesitate. We ended them. Silence fell like a void. Then why come here? Threx demanded. If you have that kind of power, why not conquer? Why not destroy us all? For the first time, there was emotion in Vance's eyes. Not anger. Something colder. We didn't come to conquer you, he said. A pause. We came because you reminded us of them. The chamber froze. Your fleets. Your protocols. Your certainty that power gives you the right to decide who survives. Each word landed harder than the last. You're walking the same path. Threx's voice dropped. Then this attack, this demonstration. Vance nodded slightly. A warning. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Threx asked the question no one else dared to. And if we don't listen? For the first time, Commander Vance didn't answer immediately. Because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't tactical. It was final. When he spoke, his voice carried something far heavier than power. Then we finish what we started a long time ago. The transmission cut. Across the galaxy, millions had been listening, watching, hoping. Now, they understood. This wasn't an invasion. This was judgment. And humanity was deciding whether the galaxy deserved to survive. The transmission ended, but its echo didn't. Across the Galactic Concord, silence replaced panic. Because panic required confusion. And now, they understood enough to be afraid. They're not invaders, one council member whispered. They're survivors. That word spread quickly. Survivors. Grand Marshal Threx stood alone in the observation chamber once again, staring into the void. But this time, he wasn't looking for the human battleship. He was looking past it. Archive command, he said quietly. A soft voice responded. Access granted. Search all recorded galactic history. Any reference to pre-Concord civilizations matching the description provided. A pause. Then, search parameters unclear. Threx closed his eyes, then spoke carefully. Civilizations capable of system-level destruction. Older than 60,000 cycles. Missing. The system processed. Seconds stretched. Then, results found. Threx's eyes opened. Display. The chamber filled with light. Fragments of data appeared, broken, incomplete, ancient beyond reliable record. Most of it was corrupted, erased, lost to time. But some pieces remained. A name. The Eternal Dominion. Threx frowned. I've never heard of them. Records indicate intentional deletion, the system replied. By whom? Unknown. Another fragment appeared. A map. Not of the current galaxy, but an older one. Or rather, the same galaxy, before something changed. Entire regions were marked, not as territories, but as controlled zones. Dominated. They ruled this much. Threx whispered. Estimated 73% of known space. Threx felt the weight of that number. The Concord, at its height, controlled less than 40. And they're gone, he asked. Yes. How? The system paused, then displayed a final fragment. A single line. Recovered from a destroyed data core. We thought we were the apex. Then they arrived. Threx stared at it. They, he repeated. At that moment, the chamber doors opened. An advisor rushed in, breathless. Marshal, you need to see this. On the human battleship, something had changed. Commander Vance stood on the command deck, hands behind his back. Status, he said. Concord transmissions have ceased, the communications officer replied. They're not attempting further contact. Vance nodded. They're thinking. And if they decide to fight again? Vance didn't look away from the stars. They won't. A pause. They're starting to understand. But even as he said it, an alert sounded. New signal detected, the sensor officer said. Vance turned slightly. Origin. The officer hesitated. Not Concord. That got everyone's attention. Unknown signature. The officer continued. But it's old. How old? The answer came quietly. Older than anything we've scanned in this galaxy. Silence fell across the deck. Vance's expression changed. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. Put it on screen. The display shifted. At first, nothing. Then, a pattern. Faint. Fragmented. But unmistakable. A symbol. Not human. But familiar. Too familiar. One of the officers leaned forward. Commander, what is that? Vance didn't answer immediately, because he already knew. And that knowledge was dangerous. Finally, he spoke. That, he said quietly, is impossible. Back in the Concord chamber, Threx watched the same signal appear across their systems. What are we looking at? An advisor asked. Threx didn't respond, because something deep in the recovered archives had just connected. The symbol, the missing empire, the erased history. They're not gone, he whispered. Who? The advisor asked. Threx turned slowly. The ones humanity fought. Silence. You're saying they survived? Another voice said. Threx's expression darkened. No. A pause. I'm saying, they've been waiting. On the human battleship, alarms began to rise. Not chaotic, but urgent. Multiple signal echoes. Spatial distortions increasing. Commander, something is emerging. Vance stepped forward. For the first time since entering the galaxy. He looked uncertain. Location, he demanded. The answer came back instantly. Everywhere. Across the galaxy. Stars flickered. Space trembled. And from the deepest, oldest parts of the void, something began to wake. Something that had once ruled everything. Something humanity had tried to erase. And failed. Vance closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then gave the only order that mattered. All hands. Prepare for extinction-level engagement. Because the galaxy had just made a terrible assumption. Humanity wasn't the beginning of the fear. It was what came after. The galaxy didn't hear it. Not at first. There was no explosion. No flash of light. No grand entrance. Just a distortion. Subtle. Wrong. Like reality itself had taken a breath. And forgot how to exhale. Across thousands of systems, instruments began to fail. Not malfunction. Not overload. Fail. Energy readings dropped to zero, then spiked beyond measurable limits. Stars dimmed, then brightened, then flickered. This isn't possible, a Concord scientist whispered. But it was happening. Everywhere. On the human battleship, the alarms were no longer controlled. They were escalating, layer by layer, system by system. Gravitational constants fluctuating. Quantum baseline instability detected. Commander, we are losing predictive models. That was the moment the crew realized something was truly wrong. Human systems didn't fail. They adapted. They calculated. They overcame. But this wasn't something you could calculate. Commander Elias Vance stood at the center of the chaos, his expression locked in cold focus. Visual, he ordered. The main screen activated. At first, nothing. Then, something moved between the stars. Not through space. Through reality. A shape began to form. Vast. Impossible. Undefined. The sensors tried to lock onto it. Failed. Tried again. Failed again. Because it wasn't a ship. It wasn't matter. It was something else entirely. Contact confirmed. The sensor officer said, his voice barely holding together. How many? Vance asked. The answer came in a whisper. We don't know. In the Concord chamber, panic had returned. But this time, it was different. Because this fear wasn't of defeat. It was of annihilation. What are they? One council member shouted. Threx didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the data streaming before him. Ancient fragments. Recovered warnings. Broken histories. All pointing to the same truth. They're not a civilization, he said slowly. They're a correction. The first star went out. No explosion. No collapse. It simply stopped existing. Across the galaxy, billions watched as light vanished from the sky. And then another star followed. And another. Like candles being extinguished by an unseen hand. On the human battleship. Commander, we are detecting mass stellar deletions. Causality breakdown confirmed in affected regions. This isn't destruction, it's removal. Vance clenched his jaw. Same as before, he said quietly. One of the officers looked at him. Before? Vance didn't respond. Because there was no time. Energy spike, another officer shouted. Directly ahead. The distortion intensified. And then, it appeared. Fully. Even the human systems struggled to process it. A structure, if it could be called that, unfolded into existence. It stretched across millions of kilometers. Not solid. Not liquid. Not energy. All of them. None of them. And at its center, a single point of darkness. Absolute. Target designation? The tactical officer asked. Vance's voice came out cold. Eternal. The thing moved. Not forward. Not through space. But closer. Instantly. Impact imminent, someone shouted. Brace. But there was no impact. Instead, something touched the ship. Not physically. Something deeper. Every system flickered. Every screen distorted. And for a brief, horrifying moment, the crew saw something else. Not the present. The past. Worlds burning. Stars collapsing. Entire civilizations screaming into silence. Humanity's war. And at the center of it, these things. Unstoppable. Unfeeling. Unending. The vision vanished. Report. Vance barked. Minimal physical damage, an officer replied. But what? Something tried to access our systems. Silence. Vance's expression darkened. It's learning, he said. Across the galaxy, more of them appeared. Not ships. Not fleets. Manifestations. Each one rewriting the rules of reality as it emerged. Planets began to distort. Time fractured. Entire regions of space folded in on themselves. The Concord fleets didn't even try to engage. Because now, they understood. This was the enemy humanity had fought. And somehow, survived. On the human battleship, the command deck grew still. Because now, there was only one question left. Commander, the tactical officer said quietly. Can we stop them? Vance didn't answer immediately. For the first time, there was hesitation. Not fear, but something heavier. Truth. Finally, he spoke. No. Silence felt like a death sentence. Then he continued. But we can hold them. A pause. And this time, his eyes locked onto the impossible entity ahead. We finish it. The engines of the human battleship ignited. Not with light, but with something far more dangerous. Intent. Across the galaxy, hope and terror collided. Because humanity had just made its choice. Not to run, not to warn, but to fight. Against something that had once nearly erased them. And might still succeed. The war for the galaxy had just begun. The galaxy was breaking. Stars vanished without warning. Planets twisted into impossible shapes. Entire regions of space folded, stretched, and collapsed like fragile glass under unseen pressure. The eternal had returned. And this time, they weren't dormant. They were correcting. Across the Concord, across every civilization, a single realization spread. This was not a war. It was an undoing. On the human battleship, the command deck was steady again. Not calm. Not safe. Focused. Status, Commander Elias Vance said. Containment protocols failing across multiple sectors. Enemy manifestations increasing exponentially. Predictive models now show full galactic collapse within. The officer stopped. Say it, Vance ordered. 9 hours. Silence. 9 hours. 60,000 years of galactic civilization. Gone. Then we proceed, Vance said. No hesitation. No debate. Because this moment had been prepared for. Authorization? The tactical officer asked. Vance looked at him. For a brief second, something human flickered in his expression. Then it was gone. Granted. Deep within the battleship. Far below the armored decks and weapon systems. Something awakened. Not an engine. Not a reactor. Something older. Core access unlocked. Neural lattice synchronized. Temporal anchors disengaging. The voice of the ship itself spoke, calm, artificial, and ancient. Project Revenant is now active. Across the galaxy, every sensor, every system, every piece of technology detected it. A shift. Not in space. Not in energy. In reality itself. Back in the Concord chamber, Threx staggered slightly. "What is that?" an advisor whispered. But this time, the answer didn't come from their systems. It came from the human transmission channel. Unprompted, uninvited, unavoidable. Commander Vance appeared on every screen across the galaxy. "This is your final lesson," he said. On the human ship, the hull began to change. Not physically, conceptually. Its edges blurred. Its structure unfolded into something larger than its original form. Not expanding in space, but in meaning. "What are we seeing?" the Concord scientists demanded. "No measurable dimensions. No fixed mass. It's existing in multiple states simultaneously." Vance's voice continued. "You see a ship." A pause. "That's because you need to." The battleship shifted again. And for a moment, the illusion broke. It wasn't a ship. It never had been. It was a construct. A containment system. A weapon. Built around something far more dangerous. "Humanity learned something in our war," Vance said. "That you cannot destroy what does not follow the rules of existence." The eternal entity ahead reacted. For the first time, it changed. The dark core pulsed. The surrounding structure warped violently. It had noticed. "So we didn't try," Vance continued. Deep within the core of the ship, a presence stirred. Not mechanical. Not artificial. Aware. We became something else. Across the galaxy, time stuttered. Not metaphorically. Actually. Moments repeated. Signals echoed before they were sent. Events overlapped. The eternal began to move. Violently now. Space fractured around it as it surged toward the human construct. Containment failing, an officer shouted. Vance didn't react. "Release it," he said. And then, they did. The battleship collapsed. Not destroyed. Unwrapped. What emerged had no shape, no boundary, no definition. But every living mind in the galaxy felt it. Humanity, not as a species, not as individuals, as a singular will. A thing that had endured extinction. Again, and again, and again. "You call them gods," Vance's voice echoed, though he was no longer visible. "We called them the end." The eternal entity struck. Reality tore open. Entire sections of space vanished on contact. And for the first time, something pushed back. The human presence surged forward. Not through space, but through existence itself. The collision wasn't visible, but it was felt. Across every system, every mind, every star. Memories flooded the galaxy. Human worlds burning. Human fleets falling. Humanity dying. And rising again. Stronger. Different. "They erased us," the voice said. "And we came back." The eternal recoiled. Not damaged, but resisted. "That's not possible," a Concord scientist whispered. But it was. Because humanity had done the impossible. They had adapted. To extinction. The battle raged beyond comprehension. Concept against concept. Existence against correction. And slowly, the eternal began to change. Not winning, but no longer certain. And in that uncertainty, humanity found something it had been searching for a very long time. A way to end it. Vance's voice returned. Faint. Distant. "Now," he said. Across the collapsing battlefield, the human presence converged. Focusing. Compressing. Becoming something sharp. Something final. "For everything you took." The galaxy held its breath. "We returned the favor." And then, everything went white. There was no explosion. No shockwave. No final roar of victory. Just silence. Not the silence of space. Not the quiet between stars. Something deeper. The kind of silence that comes after something impossible ends. Across the galaxy, everything stopped. Ships froze mid-transmission. Sensors went dark. Even time, for the briefest, unmeasurable moment, seemed to hesitate. And then, reality resumed. Stars flickered back into existence. Not all of them, but enough. Distorted regions of space slowly began to stabilize. Folded systems unfolded. Broken causality lines stitched themselves back together. The eternal were gone. Not retreating. Not hidden. Gone. On the edge of a recovering system, a damaged Concord vessel drifted in silence. "Are we alive?" one of the crew whispered. No one answered immediately, because none of them were sure. Sensors slowly came back online. Scanning. A pause. Then, no hostile entities detected. Back in the grand deliberation chamber, the survivors gathered. Fewer than before. Quieter than ever. Grand Marshal Threx stood at the center. But he looked older now. Not physically. Historically. "Report," he said. A scientist stepped forward. "The eternal presence has completely vanished." "Confirmed destruction?" another asked. The scientist hesitated. "We don't know." That uncertainty lingered. Because some things couldn't be measured. "And the humans?" Threx asked. Silence. Then, no signal. No ships. No trace. The words echoed through the chamber. No trace. Days passed. Then weeks. The galaxy slowly stabilized. Civilizations counted their losses. Entire systems were gone. Billions of lives erased. But it wasn't extinction. Not this time. And that fact terrified them. Because they all knew. It hadn't been their victory. It had been humanity's. Months later, a signal appeared. Weak. Faint. But unmistakable. Not a fleet. Not a weapon. A message. It spread across the galaxy instantly. No encryption. No barriers. As if it wanted to be heard. The same voice returned. Commander Elias Vance. But it sounded different. Distant. Like it was speaking from somewhere far beyond reach. "The Eternal are no longer active in this region," he said. A pause. For now. Across countless worlds, billions listened. No one dared interrupt. "You will rebuild," Vance continued. "You will recover." His voice hardened slightly. "And you will remember." The words carried weight. Not as a threat. As a fact. "We did not come here to save you," he said. A long silence followed. "We came to make sure you did not become them." In the Concord chamber, Threx closed his eyes. Because now, he understood everything. Power without restraint, Vance continued. Control without consequence. A pause. That path ends the same way. Every time. Images flashed across the transmission. Not of war, but of history. The Concord's conquests. Destroyed civilizations. Erased species. "You were close," Vance said quietly. The transmission flickered, as if whatever was sending it was fading. "What happens now?" Threx asked suddenly, stepping forward. For a moment, there was no response. Then, Vance's voice returned. "We leave." The word hit harder than anything before it. "Where?" Threx asked. A pause. Then, "Where we're needed." Silence. "And if they come back?" another voice called out. "If the Eternal return?" For the first time, there was something almost human in the reply. "They will." Fear rippled through the galaxy again. But next time, the signal began to break apart. "You'll have a choice." The image faded. The voice weakened. "Stand as you are. Or, become something more." The transmission ended. And this time, nothing replaced it. No ship. No signal. No humanity. Years passed. The galaxy rebuilt. Slower. More carefully. The Concord changed. Not out of kindness, but out of memory. Weapons were still built. Fleets still formed. But there were rules now. Limits. Lines that would not be crossed. Because everyone remembered what waited beyond them. And sometimes, in the deepest parts of space, where sensors barely worked, where reality felt just slightly thinner, there were whispers, faint signals, echoes of something vast, watching, waiting, not to conquer, not to rule, but to decide. And across the galaxy, every civilization lived with the same quiet understanding. Humanity had not saved them. It had judged them. And for now, they had passed.